Yeousch!
At a glance, this looks like your run-of-the-mill tower defense game, albeit with a pleasing fantasy vibe. But there are many things that set this title apart from your typical game in the genre. Prime World Defenders takes the staples of tower defense and mashes them with a trading card role-playing game. The pure gameplay is pretty standard. You're shown an isometric view of a map with predetermined areas where you can place varying types of defensive towers. Differing enemies come in waves through a specific path, and your job is to strategically install towers to prevent the enemies from proceeding. What towers you place and where will depend on what types of enemies arrive. It's a tried and true, addictive formula. Prime World Defenders throws in a couple of wrenches to change the gameplay up. One of the first things you'll notice is that when you place several of the same type of tower on the map, that tower then becomes more expensive for the rest of that match. It's an interesting way to encourage using a more diverse setup with many different types of towers, and it works. There are also enemy towers occasionally in place when you start that can buff the enemies as they reach its range, such as healing them or speeding them up. It adds a different layer of strategy that will affect when and where you deploy which towers. You're also given magic abilities, which can be used actively at any time, anywhere on the map, to help out your defenses. The uses can vary from damaging enemies to slowing them down or weakening them, and each has a time-based cooldown between uses. The impact of magic is minimal though, so you still need to do the heavy lifting with your towers. But really, it's the time spent between these matches that Prime World Defenders really shows what makes it different. This is because everything in the game revolves around receiving different types of cards. They could be new defensive towers, or maybe duplicates of towers you already own that can then be used to fuse with the original card, giving it a stat upgrade. You could get cards that reward you with different kinds of currency in the form of silver or stars. Other cards will serve solely as upgrade aids, or be new magic spells. Discovering new types of cards is always exciting, and you'll find yourself anxious to try out new towers in an upcoming mission, with 20 different towers in total. And while cards can be earned through completing missions, they can also be purchased in booster packs with currency. With the card playing core mechanic, Prime World Defenders does a great job of bringing a feeling of progression to the tower defense genre. But finding, purchasing, and upgrading cards are not the only aspect that this game borrows from RPGs. There's a plot-driven story mission path, which follows the quest of a group of exile hunters to save the world from monsters that appeared from a cataclysmic event. The story is outlined through cutscenes with comic-style panels.
There's only one problem. This place is inhabited by the Touched, and they won't take too kindly to our presence.
We'll give them what they deserve. Defenders, ahead to our new home.
And while it does an admirable job of trying to provide a backdrop to tower defense gameplay, it still fails to be interesting. I mean, it's hard to explain why I'll be going to different places and setting up towers over and over again. There are boss encounters to switch things up, but they happen without much of a setup, so there's no feeling of anticipation upon having come across them. And the boss encounters themselves mostly just amount to large, slow enemies with tons of hit points. Still, they do manage to feel differently than all of the other maps, as you approach things very differently when forced to take down a single enemy as quickly as possible. The voice acting is pretty inconsistent, and the comments you'll hear during a match sound mostly without context. You might hear, "We should use magic more often."
We should use magic more often.
When you've just started a match before you've even had a chance to use it. Or a voice will say, "We need to return to the base."
Let's head back. We need to replace some gears.
As if you had a choice to do that. There are some quotes here and there, though, that are good for a chuckle. Another way that Prime World Defenders borrows from RPGs is in how you'll also earn experience points, which can be used to unlock perks that provide a variety of advantages. These can include adding extra slots to equip towers before missions, or making it cheaper to upgrade cards that you already own. And next to the story mission path, This game also brings with it side missions, which can be used to grind for upgrades and experience when needed. This is where you'll find the most significant problem with Prime World Defenders. There is far too much grinding required in this game. You will be glad that the side missions are available to help you earn money and cards for upgrading your towers to be able to handle the challenges ahead. But the rewards for each of these side missions are stingy, so you'll find yourself playing them many times before you've managed to get yourself that upgrade that you badly need. Worse, these side missions get old fast. The game features a mission generator for infinite replayability, as the amount of side missions is indeed infinite. But you're going to see the same maps over and over, and your strategies will only minimally vary as some different types of enemies are swapped in. You'll always have your go-to towers for each type of enemy, and after playing these missions repeatedly, you're all done with surprises. The side missions are split up into 3 difficulty levels, but even the hardest ones, which offer the most rewards, tend to be easy, and you'll almost always be able to complete them without letting a single enemy pass. As a result, doing these missions feels routine and unsatisfying, and quickly devolves into work. Getting through the story missions could take anywhere from 15 to 20 hours, and the vast majority of time in Prime World Defenders will ultimately be spent in these easy, repetitive side missions. This is also because when you do attempt a story mission and fail, you get nothing for your time. Absolutely nothing. You could get all the way to the final wave and lose, but you'll come away with nothing to show for it. It's especially difficult to scrounge up the motivation to attempt another run at a lengthy story mission, knowing that it could all end up in completely wasted time if you lose. However, the setting and presentation of Prime World Defenders is quite good. While you're grinding those missions, you're treated to an attractive, functional, artistic style. And aside from the sketchy voice acting, the fact that the sound effects and music don't get repetitive is a tribute to their implementation. The interface itself is also well done and easy to understand, but a couple of changes would have been nice. Before a mission, you're shown icons that represent different enemy types so that you know what you'll be facing and can be appropriately prepared. But in order to change your cards before you start, you'll need to leave that mission screen and head back to your collection. Since you'll need to do this almost every time, it would be nice to have the option to customize your card set while looking at the enemy types, not having to leave that screen. Additionally, the icons that represent the enemy types look generic with very subtle differences. A picture of the enemy itself would have been much better, or perhaps a pop-up of a picture when mousing over the icon. Early on, it can be hard to remember what enemies have which names. If you start the match and find that you assumed wrong, you'll need to start all over again. But the most glaring omission to me is the lack of a gameplay undo function. You can sell towers that you place, but only for half of what you spent to deploy them. This makes sense strategically, but it kills when you accidentally deploy the wrong tower or put a tower in the wrong square. In a strategy game, it doesn't make sense to punish inaccurate clicking. It would help tremendously to have a 5 or 10 second cooldown, allowing you to sell for full price if you make a mistake like this. And if you didn't sell within that time period, tough luck. But right now, an undo feature like this feels utterly missing. In light of all this though, the developers really seem to be listening to the community. Many people have been playing the beta version for some time, and looking at the Steam forums, it's obvious that the developers have been paying attention to player feedback and implementing changes based on it. This is a really awesome thing to see, so it's possible that some of these mechanical gripes could eventually be addressed to some degree. All that said, here's the bottom line. I'm giving Prime World Defenders a score of 3 out of 5. It's an above average game, and one of the cooler approaches to tower defense that I've come across. Implementing card game RPG mechanics into the standard formula makes the result much more engrossing than your typical tower defense game. And working to upgrade your towers to get past the next story mission can get pretty addictive. But the main problem with this game is the pacing. When you hit a hard story mission, you'll too often be required to spend hours grinding for cards and currency to earn strong enough towers to proceed. If the side missions offered greater rewards, or if failing a story mission offered at least something in return for making a set amount of progress, this could be circumvented. But as it stands, most of the time playing Prime World Defenders is spent grinding repetitive side missions. Either way, if you're a fan of tower defense, this game should be played. It's a strong angle on the genre that we haven't seen yet, and at only $14.99, it's a great value. And who knows, with the attention the developers are giving to the community, it could get even better.